Vienna, January 1986. 3 weeks after gunmen turned the El Al counter at Schwechat Airport into a killing floor, a courier for one of Europe's most careful networks made a single mistake. He left his overcoat behind. The men hunting that network had no name for the ghost who ran it, no photograph, no address. A quartermaster who never carried a thing worth finding. What they had was the coat. And sewn into its lining, folded to the size of a postage stamp, was a numbered dry cleaning ticket. This is how one laundry mark pulled an entire courier chain apart, city by city. This is Operation Hemline. Welcome to Agent Uncovered, where the smallest object in the room is the one that ends the story. Subscribe and stay close for clean, patient intelligence work. Vienna in January 1986 was a gray city under a low sky. The Danube running dark past the curved towers of the United Nations complex on its far bank. Snow sat on the rooftops of the First District. The trams came round the Ringstrasse in red and white, past the Opera and the Hofburg, and inside the coffee houses, men read newspapers hung on wooden rods and did not look up. It was one of the most watched cities in Europe, and everyone who lived there knew it. There was a reason for that. Austria was neutral ground, its neutrality written into a treaty in 1955. And neutral ground was where the services of both blocs could work without quite touching each other. Since 1979, the city had held a United Nations headquarters of its own, the third in the world. And with it came thousands of diplomats and the natural cover a diplomat provides. Austrian law chased espionage against Austria. Espionage aimed at anyone else it tended to leave alone. For a generation, that made Vienna a marketplace, and the men who worked it were buyers and sellers of secrets. It sat, besides, barely 50 kilometers from the Iron Curtain, close enough that Ladas and the odd Trabant from the east mixed on its streets with the Mercedes and the Opels of the west. But in the last week of the old year, the marketplace had turned into something else. On the 27th of December 1985, at roughly 09:15 hours, gunmen with grenades and rifles had opened fire at the El Al ticket counters at Schwechat Airport and at the same minute at Fiumicino in Rome. Around 19 travelers were dead across the two cities, a child among them, and near 140 more were wounded. The Abu Nidal organization had done it. A Palestinian faction then run out of Syria, and it had done it in the open, in two capitals, before breakfast. An attack like that does not run on nothing. It runs on money that has to move, documents that have to be forged and carried, safe rooms that have to be paid for, weapons that have to be bought from men in Warsaw or East Berlin and walked west. That machinery has a name in the trade. It is called logistics, and the men who ran it were the quiet half of the organization. No manifestos, no claims of credit, only invoices and couriers and the patient movement of value across borders. It was slow, unglamorous, and almost impossible to see. And it was the half that made all the rest possible. Israeli intelligence had spent years learning the loud half. Now it turned to the quiet one. In a station somewhere in Western Europe, a case officer the files would only ever call by the codename Osprey opened a new operation. His real name was Eitan Sofer. The gunmen at the counter were already dead. They were never the point. What Sofer wanted was the network that had fed them, and in particular the man who ran its European logistics, a quartermaster who moved money and paper from Vienna down through Milan to the sea at Marseille. They had a shape for him and almost nothing else. He was careful the way only a professional is careful. He carried nothing. He signed nothing. He kept no fixed address that anyone could name, used no telephone twice, and had never once been photographed by any service that would admit it. On the assessments that crossed Sofer's desk, he had only a working name, a nom de guerre borrowed from the field, Abu Sharif. A ghost leaves nothing behind. That was the problem Operation Hemline was built to solve. And for the first 3 weeks of the new year, it did not look solvable at all. The break, when it came, owed nothing to any plan of theirs. It came the way real breaks usually do, out of someone else's fear. In the second week of January, the crackdown that follows any attack was still rolling across the city. Police checked papers at the stations. Watchers stood in doorways on the Kärntner Strasse. Every man moving money for the wrong people felt the ground narrow under him, and one of them moved too fast. He was a courier, mid-30s, traveling under the cover of a carpet importer. And on a cold morning, he cut a meeting short, walked out of a small hotel near the Naschmarkt, and in his hurry left a heavy wool overcoat hanging in the wardrobe of the room. The hotel, like most in that district, kept its unclaimed property in a back cupboard and forgot about it. It would have stayed forgotten, except that the room had been of passing interest to a local asset. And within 2 days, the coat was no longer in the cupboard. It was on a table in a rented flat across the city, under a lamp, being taken apart by a woman with a seam ripper. Her name was Yael Sela. On the operation, she was Martin, and her job was the part of intelligence work that looks least like the films, the reading of objects. She went through the coat the way a customs officer goes through a suitcase, slowly and without hope, because most of the time, there is nothing. The pockets were empty. The maker's label had been cut out at the collar. The seams were sound. The man had been trained, and a trained man leaves a clean coat. He had left a clean coat. The lining was another matter. Behind the sleeve lining, where the wool met the silk and a careful hand had once opened the seam and closed it again, was a slip of paper folded down to the size of a postage stamp. Sela worked it free with the point of the ripper and spread it flat under the lamp. It was a dry cleaning claim ticket, a pre-printed slip, 1/2 of a numbered pair, the kind a shop tears along a perforation and hands you across the counter. It carried a number and nothing else. No shop name, no street, no city even. Just a run of digits printed and stamped on a paper the size of a train stub. Around the table, the first reaction was that it was nothing. The man had left them a number with no shop attached to it, in a city of hundreds of cleaners, in a country of thousands. You cannot telephone a number that has no exchange. By the standards of the men they were hunting, men who received their orders as strings of figures read aloud over a shortwave radio and decoded against a pad of random numbers that was burned page by page after use. Leaving a laundry ticket in a coat was not even a mistake worth the name. Sela did not think it was nothing. She had seen a ticket like it do a great deal of work once before, in another city, in another year. And she knew something about the cleaner's world that the men around the table did not. She knew that a numbered ticket was only ever half of the system. There were 2 ways a cleaner kept track of a coat, and they ran in parallel. The first was the paper, the numbered claim ticket, 1/2 to the customer, the matching half staying with the shop in a daybook. The second was a mark placed on the garment itself, so that in a back room full of other men's coats, yours could never be separated from your name. The paper could be lost, burned, folded into a lining, and forgotten. The mark on the cloth stayed. Sela turned the coat inside out again, and this time she ignored the paper and hunted for the mark. She did not find it under the lamp because she was not meant to. She found it when she killed the lamp and lit the coat with an ultraviolet lamp instead, and a short line of characters woke up on the inside of the sleeve, glowing pale, invisible in daylight, and plain as a road sign in the dark. This was a quiet piece of the cleaner's craft. and it was entirely real. By the middle of the 1980s, a great many cleaners marked garments with inks that showed only under a black light. Patented products a shop could buy off the shelf. So a customer's coat came back unmarked to the naked eye and marked forever to anyone who knew where to look. And there were standard places to look. Investigators had known for decades that the marks sat in the same concealed spots on every kind of garment. The sleeve lining of a coat, the waistband of a pair of trousers, the neckband of a shirt, the sweatband inside a hat. Sella had gone to the sleeve lining first because that is where such marks are placed. Police laboratories had built whole reference files on nothing but these marks, cross-lit under ultraviolet, kept on index cards, sorted by whether a mark was written or stamped, and whether it ran in numbers, letters, or little symbols. So now they had two things instead of one. They had the numbered paper ticket, and they had the glowing mark on the cloth. And the two together were a great deal more than a number on a slip. But they still did not have a shop. And here the operation ran into the very thing that made the system useful to a cleaner and useless to a stranger. There was no national standard. Every shop numbered and marked its own way. A run of characters that meant one article, cleaned in March, for customer number such and such in one shop, meant nothing at all 3 streets away. To read the mark, you first had to know whose hand had written it. For that, Sofer reached for a scion. The word describes the network of local Jewish men and women abroad who help an Israeli operation without being agents of it. A car hire clerk, a hotelier, a doctor, a shopkeeper. People who give a little knowledge or a little access out of loyalty and then go back to their lives. The one Sofer wanted had sold supplies to the cleaning trade across Vienna for 30 years. His name in the file was Kurt Halberstam, and he could look at the chemistry of a fluorescent mark and the style of a stamped numeral and tell you the kind of shop it came from, and the district it most likely stood in, even without naming the shop itself. He took a city of hundreds of cleaners and cut it down to a short list of small, old family shops on the near side of the Weinzeile. From there it was legwork. Legwork, in this case, meant walking into cleaners with a plausible story and a good eye. An operative would bring in a coat, wait at the counter, and while a ticket was written and a garment marked, watch the hand that did it. Halberstam's short list held 11 shops. It took 9 days to work through them, and on the 8th of February, a watcher standing at a counter near the Naschmarkt saw a clerk stamp a claim ticket with a numeral formed exactly the way the numerals on their ticket were formed, and under the counter, on a low shelf, a black light lamp of the kind a careful shop kept for reading its own marks. That was the shop. Now the number could speak. The reading of a mark back to a person had been worked out by police laboratories long before, and it had not changed much. A serial written on a garment was a compressed sentence. A real case from an earlier decade had decoded a hat marked 1C 1580,832 as a single article, cleaned in the 3rd month, C being the 3rd letter for March, on the 15th day, for customer number 80,832. The customer number was the key that turned. It meant nothing on its own, but the shop kept a book, and in the book, the number sat beside a name and an address, written in the proprietor's own hand. They did not have to break in. A shop that keeps a daybook keeps it where the counter staff can reach it. And an operation with a scion inside the cleaning business and a night to work in can read a book without the owner ever knowing a page was turned. On the night of the 10th of February, working by a shaded torch after the shop went dark, Operation Hemline read the account that matched the mark on the courier's coat. The customer number resolved to a name and an address in the 2nd district. The name was Rafik Mansour, importer of carpets, 35 years old. For Selah, that was the strange, quiet moment the work turned on, and it always unsettled her a little. A man she had never seen had become real to her through a coat and a line in a ledger, with no face and no voice attached. His size, his taste in cloth, the district he lived in, the month he last thought to have a stain removed. She had built a whole person out of the residue a careful man leaves without noticing he leaves it. She knew, sitting in the dark over the book, that somewhere across the city, Rafik Mansour was asleep and did not know he had already been found, and that the distance between that page and his front door was now only a matter of days. Then she closed the book, put it back exactly as it had lain, and went out into the cold. And then, reading further down the same page before she left, she had found the thing that changed the size of the operation. The account she was reading did not belong to Mansour alone. The proprietor, for the convenience of a good customer, had run more than one man's garments through the same standing account and the same marking hand. The Courier's and another's. The second man's coats came in less often, were always of better cloth, and were always collected by someone else. The book withheld his name and offered only a shape, careful, well-dressed, and never once seen at the counter. Selah had walked in looking for a courier. She had found the edge of the man the courier worked for. The temptation, with a name and a door, is to knock. Operation Hemline did the opposite. A courier is a spoke. Arrest a spoke and the hub feels the wheel shudder and is gone by morning. So instead of taking Mansour, they learned him. The man who learned him was a field watcher the file called Kite. In daylight, a man named Amnon Gilad, and his instrument was a camera. He worked with a Nikon F3, the professional's 35mm body of the decade, and on it, a motor drive that could pull 4 frames a second and a long prime lens, 300mm, sometimes 400, that let him stand a street away and still fill the frame with a man's hands. Across 3 weeks of February, he built a picture of Mansour's days, one roll of film at a time. And the picture was the picture of a professional. A single watcher in a doorway is the amateur's picture of surveillance. The real thing is a team laid out around the target like a box that floats along the street with him. Someone ahead, someone behind on each side, someone on the parallel road. And the people in the box trade places as he turns, so that the man who walked behind him on one street is standing still reading a timetable on the next, while a fresh face takes up the follow. The watchers call it working the box, and its whole purpose is that no single face is ever seen twice. Mansour, for his part, moved like a man who assumed he was being followed. He doubled back. He stepped onto a tram and off again as the doors closed. He took long routes to short destinations. The trade calls that a surveillance detection run, a path built to make a follower show himself. And Mansour ran one most days. Twice a week, the run ended somewhere that mattered. Once, it was a dead drop, a gap behind a loose stone in a wall, off a quiet courtyard, filled and emptied without 2 people ever meeting. Its loading announced by a single stroke of chalk on a lamppost 2 streets away. Once it was a brush pass on a crowded tram, the whole exchange a half-second where a shoulder met a shoulder, and a folded envelope went from one coat to another, with no break in either man's stride. On one roll of Gilad's film, enlarged later in a dark room, Mansour could be seen at a cafe table with a small object, cupped in his palm no bigger than a cigarette lighter. A subminiature camera. Its negative barely 8 by 11 millimeters. The kind of tool a courier used to photograph a document he was not allowed to carry. He photographed the paper and handed it straight back. He copied. He kept nothing. It nearly came apart once. On a wet afternoon near the end of the month, a young operative, new and eager, closed the distance too far on the parallel street and let Mansour see the same coat twice inside 10 minutes. Mansour stopped at a kiosk, bought a newspaper he did not want, and used the glass of the kiosk to read the street behind him. For a long moment, the whole operation balanced on whether one careful man believed his own nerves. This was the exact edge that had destroyed an Israeli team in Norway years before at Lillehammer, where too many operatives and a car used one time too many had ended in the murder of an innocent waiter and the arrest of the people who did it. Sofer pulled the eager man off the street that night. Mansour, in the end, decided he was tired and jumping at shadows. He folded his newspaper and walked home. The watchers breathed out and stayed on him. What the watching proved was what Mansour did with the money he collected. He passed it on. He was the Vienna end of a line that ran south, and in the second week of March, he showed them where the line went. He bought a sleeper berth on an overnight train out of Austria. There was no fast, direct run from Vienna to Milan in those years. The Alps saw to that. A traveler took one of two long transalpine roads, south past the Semmering and down through Villach to cross into Italy at Tarvisio, or west by Salzburg and Innsbruck and over the Brenner Pass to Verona. And either way, it was 11 hours or more across some 800 kilometers of mountain. Best spent asleep in a couchette while the passes went by black in the window. Mansour took the sleeper. So, in a different carriage, did one of Kite's people, and a message went ahead down the line so that when the train sighed into Milano Centrale in the morning, under that vast roof of iron and glass with its carved eagles, a fresh face was waiting on the platform. Following a man across a national frontier is its own discipline. A watcher cannot simply walk after his target through passport control the way he might round a corner in Vienna. The follow has to be handed off, one team standing down at the border and another, warned by a message sent ahead, taking it up on the far side so that no single face rides the whole length of the line. It is the box again, only stretched across 800 kilometers and 2 countries, and it is where most surveillance of a traveling target quietly fails. This one did not. The handover held through the night, and Milan took up the thread clean in the morning. The fresh face belonged to the Milan observer, codename Lynx, Uri Segel, and he picked up Mansour and, more importantly, picked up the man Mansour had come to see. The line ran to the Navigli, the old canal district on the south side of the city, artisan and a little rough in those years, before the fashion money came and smoothed it. In a first-floor office above a courtyard off the water, an importer-exporter named Nabil Saraf, around 40, ran the middle of the chain. Saraf was the money, and the money moved in a way that left almost no wake at all. Saraf did not wire funds. A wire leaves a record in a bank. He worked the oldest informal system in the region, the one that men in his line simply called hawala. A man hands cash and a password to a broker in one city. The broker telephones a counterpart in another city, who pays out the same sum, less a fee, to whoever speaks the password. No cash crosses a border. No note changes hands between the two cities. The brokers settle their balances later, quietly, against other trade in the other direction. To a bank it is invisible. To a customs officer it is invisible. It was, the Milan assessment noted dryly, the single reason that following this network's money by following actual money had never once worked. You could not seize what never traveled. You could only watch the men who spoke the passwords. And now, at last, they were watching them. Siegel photographed Saraf's callers for a fortnight and mapped the office's telephone habits. A call placed most Thursdays, always from a public exchange, never from the office line, and sent the film north through the station's own channels. 2 cities were accounted for. The third was still only a rumor running down to the sea. Two cities now, Vienna and Milan, the courier and the money. What was still missing was the top. Saraf took his instructions from someone. Mansour's better-dressed shadow, the careful second name on the cleaner's account, had still never been seen by anyone on the operation. The quartermaster was still faceless. He gave himself away with the one thing he could not bring himself to give up. Go back to the cleaner's book near the Naschmarkt. The second account, the good cloth. The coats always collected by another hand. Across February and March, Operation Hemline had kept the shop under a light, patient watch. A single face in a cafe across the street changed out every few days, and the watch produced a pattern. Every few weeks, a particular overcoat came in for cleaning and relining. The same coat, an old and well-made one, sent again and again to be repaired rather than replaced. Someone paid its bill in cash, in advance, through the standing account, and someone else always carried it out. A lesser operation would have taken the man carrying the coat and learned nothing, because the man carrying the coat was only another spoke. A driver, a cutout, a face hired to walk 200 meters and hand a garment through a car window. Sofer let him walk. He wanted the man who paid, and a hired carrier was worth nothing to him. And so the watch went on through March and into April, patient as a man fishing a slow river, waiting for the single occasion the owner would break his own careful rule and come for the coat himself. And in the first week of April, when the man who finally came in person to collect it was photographed at the counter from across the street with a long lens. The assessment that landed on Sofer's desk carried a second photograph clipped beside it. A frame from Milan, taken by Lynx on the Navigli, of the same man standing at the canal's edge in conversation with Nabil Saraf. Feature for feature, they were one person. The mark had not named a courier. It had named the man the courier answered to. Here was the quartermaster. Here was Abu Sharif. In the daylight files, Ziad Haddad, near 50, moving through Europe as a Levantine textile importer, a trade that let him touch cloth and travel and money without a single lie that could easily be checked. He had built a life with no edges for a hand to catch on. And then, against all of it, he kept sending one old coat to one Vienna cleaner he had trusted for years, because a man who trusts nothing still has to trust something. And he had chosen a cleaner. The relining told its own small story. A surveillance note, reading more into a coat than a coat should hold, observed that a man of his means could buy a new overcoat every winter, and instead kept mending an old one, letting the wool wear soft while the silk inside it was renewed again and again. Someone on the team wondered aloud whose coat it had first been. A father's, a brother's, a man he had lost somewhere behind him in the years before the file began. Nobody could answer that. It was the only human thing in his whole file, and it was the thread that hanged him. A ghost leaves nothing behind, except the one habit he can no longer see is a habit. With Haddad's face on the board, the chain unrolled to its far end almost on its own, because a watched man leads you to everyone he trusts, and Haddad, having trusted a cleaner, now led the operation down the last leg of his own line. The line ran on past Milan to the coast. From Milan, the old Riviera Railway curved down to Genoa and along the Ligurian shore, through Ventimiglia at the border and along the Côte d'Azur to Marseille, around 500 kilometers, the better part of 8 hours by rail against the sea the whole way, a route the great first-class expresses had once run before the railways thinned them out. At the end of it was the port, and at the port was the last man in the chain. Marseille met the operation with its own hard weather. The Mistral was blowing the week the Marseille operative arrived, the cold, dry wind that comes down the valley of the Rhone and scours the sky to a flat, hard blue and whips the water of the old harbor white. Above it all stood the Basilica of Notre-Dame de la Garde on its hill, its gilded virgin catching the light over a city that fell away in ochre and pale stone to the sea. Under that light, a man the file called Stoat, in daylight Gaudy Weiss, worked the docks at La Joliette north of the Vieux Port, where the big commercial quays handled the cargo and the ferries for Corsica and North Africa, and where a new metro line had opened only 2 years before to carry the dock workers in. The last man was a fixer named Farid Ben Ali, around 45, French-Algerian, at home in the older world of the port, where cargo and cash had always found quiet ways past a manifest. Ben Ali was where the network's value turned back into things, where money that had crossed a continent without ever moving became a crate on a quay, a berth on a ferry, a debt settled in a back office that smelled of diesel and salt. Weiss spent 10 days learning the port the way Gilad had learned Mansour's streets, and the port did not give itself up easily. Marseille had swallowed careful men before. It kept its own old order, its own silences, and a stranger with a camera was a stranger with a camera whether he answered to a service in Tel Aviv or to anyone else. But the pattern came clear in the end. Cargo that Ben Ali's hand touched moved through the quays without inspection. Ferries that carried it sailed on schedules he seemed to know before the shipping office posted them. And once in the month, a figure matching Haddad came quietly down the coast to stand for an hour on a working quay and watch a single berth, carrying nothing, speaking to no one, and then went back north the same evening. By the 3rd week of April, Sofer had all of it on one board. Vienna, the courier and the cleaner. Milan, the money and the man who moved it without moving it. Marseille, the water and the fixer who turned it back into cargo. 3 cities, a corridor of some 1,300 kilometers end to end, and at its center a man who had once been a name with no face and was now a face with a schedule. The operation had reached the point every hunt reaches, where the question stops being how do we find him and becomes what do we do now that we have. There were 2 ways to end it, and Sofer weighed them the way the profession weighs everything, coldly. The network could be rolled up loud, arrests handed to friendly services in 3 countries, the whole chain taken in a single coordinated morning. Or the hub could be taken quietly and the map left to do the rest of the work. The first way was noise. The second was the house style. The decision, when it came down from above, was for the quiet way. The end of Operation Hemline, when it came in the 2nd week of May, took less time than any single day of the 5 months that had bought it. Haddad kept, as careful men keep, to a routine so plain it was almost invisible. And a plain routine is a gift to the people watching it. On the chosen morning, at a little after 0740 hours, he left a quiet address in a quiet street and walked, as he did most mornings, toward a cafe where he read the papers before the day began. A sedan sat where it had sat for 3 mornings running. A Mercedes of the common diesel kind, a workhorse 80-horsepower saloon of a model that filled every European curb from Vienna to Marseille and drew no second glance from anyone. The weapon was the small kind favored for close work, a Beretta chambered for the smallest of cartridges, a light alloy pistol of some 480 grams, a handspan long, quiet enough to matter and forgettable enough to drop. There was no chase and no struggle and no last words, because those belonged to films and this was work. 2 men crossed a pavement. A car door opened and closed. The Mercedes was already moving before the sound had finished, and it was gone into the morning traffic while a man lay on the stones outside a cafe with a folded newspaper still under his arm. The exit had been planned longer than the act itself. 3 routes out of the city had been walked on foot in the days before, each one timed against the weight of the morning traffic, each with a second car waiting at the end of it and a third waiting behind that. The few seconds on the pavement were the shortest and least considered part of the entire design. Within the hour, the people who had done it were separating, changing cars, becoming ordinary travelers again. And by nightfall, the operational team was scattered across 3 borders, and not one of them was in the city anymore. In the days that followed, the rest of the board came down. With the hub gone and the whole chain already mapped city by city, the spokes were handed, one piece at a time, to services who could act on them. A courier watched in Vienna, a money office known in Milan, a fixer named on the Marseille docks, and the network that had moved money for the men at the airport counter stopped moving anything at all. It had taken one abandoned coat, one folded ticket, one glowing mark on a sleeve, and a season of patience to close a chain that had run unseen for years. No government said a word. Officially, nothing had happened in that quiet street in May, and officially there had never been an Operation Hemline, and the men and women who ran it went back to other work under other code names. That silence is the story itself. The whole value of the quiet way is that it leaves no more behind than the ghost did. But strip the silence away and look at the ledger, because there is one. On the one side of it, a network was unmade, a chain that had carried money and paper and weapons across a continent for a group that shot travelers dead at an airline counter in the last week of the year. On the other side, count the cost of unmaking it. 5 months, a city's worth of watching. A team of trained operatives spent for a whole season on the question of one man's dry cleaning. And a human life ended on a pavement over a folded newspaper by people who had never once spoken to him and knew him mostly through the coats he sent to be mended. The tradecraft legacy came down to a single thing: the reading of the object. The most careful man in the network, the one who signed nothing, carried nothing, was photographed by no one, and left, by design, nothing at all, was undone by a numbered slip in a lining and a mark he could not see glowing on his own sleeve. The lesson every service took from it was the oldest one, learned over again. A professional can control almost everything except his habits, and a habit is only a mistake he has stopped noticing he makes. Which leaves the question the story is really about, and it does not come with a clean answer. From the one side, this was justice reaching the men who paid for a massacre, following the money at last to a face and closing the account. And the dead at the airport counter are a fact that does not move. From the other side, a man was tracked across a whole season and shot in the street on the strength of his loyalty to a cleaner, by a service acting far outside its own borders and answering to no court that he would ever see. And that is a fact that does not move either. Both are true. Neither one cancels the other. So here is the question: was Operation Hemline justice reaching the men behind a massacre, or only a better run version of the thing it answered? Tell us in the comments and say where you are watching from. Subscribe for the next operation and send this to the one person you know who always reads the small print.